Ferrari ended Red Bull's streak of Formula 1 victories as Carlos Sainz scored his maiden F1 win in the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. But should Charles Leclerc really have won this race, and should Ferrari be putting all of its efforts behind him to win this championship? Welcome to Paddock Packdown. It seemed for large parts of today's British Grand Prix this wasn't a race Ferrari were going to win, despite the odds being stacked heavily in its favour. Both Red Bulls were out of contention, but Lewis Hamilton was posing a big threat to the team. Carlos Sainz ultimately took that victory, but it was Charles Leclerc who led until 14 laps to go. After the race, there was a lot of discussion about whether Ferrari made the right calls or not with its strategy, and to discuss all of that, I'm joined by Autosport's F1 editor, Matt Q. Now, Mattia Binotto, he said after the race that he thought Ferrari made every decision pretty much right, so there was one they maybe could have done a little bit differently. But was there a feeling that Ferrari actually, they nearly lost this race, that they nearly threw it away, even though they so easily should have won it?
Absolutely, and you can look at a few flashpoints of that, whether it was Carlos Sainz sort of sliding off the road and throwing away track position, or when we pitted right at the end and you sort of had a sense that it was a coming crescendo with Charles Leclerc on old Robert. It was the race sort of flipped between Ferrari snatching defeat from the jaws of victory and then snatching victory seemingly from the jaws of defeat. And I know Binotto has come away, they've got the big trophy, but there seems to be a bit of backside covering going on there. And there was, he was asked, what's your reaction to fans going, you got this wrong? And he said, well, there's nothing to investigate almost, we've got this right. And I think that's a wrong attitude to take. Yes, it's worked out better than the strategy blunders of Monaco, but a 1-2's gone, so they should still be looking into that. And it could have been a lot more costly.
Yes, now you mentioned those decisions, obviously there were quite a few through the race, so let's pick up on them. I think in the opening stint as well, we saw Charles Leclerc, he was behind Carlos Sainz, he was making a lot of noise over the radio, almost as if to say, look, let me past, I am quicker. Leclerc, he's been the man Ferrari he's been the man I think we've all been thinking is going to put up the biggest challenge to Max Verstappen so far this season. Quite early on, do you think Ferrari maybe should have swapped the cars around in that opening stint, or do you think the damage to Leclerc's win was maybe causing a little bit of concern on that front?
No, I think it was the wrong thing to keep them behind. They were flat-footed. If you look back to actually last time we did a video together, it was Spain, and what we were debating then was the ruthlessness of only round 4 and Red Bull were really imposing a number 1, number 2 order, but look how far they've stretched it. And Red Bull in a position of command, it's them that can afford to sort of dilly and dather and let their 2 drivers fight it out. Ferrari need to be decisive and sort of pull no punches. And we saw, yes, Leclerc had the damage, but he had the pace advantage. He had the legs on Sainz. And all it was doing is allowing, people to close up and both up and towards the start. And then later on the race, it allowed Hamilton, not from nowhere, but from very far back, to sort of pose an unnecessary threat because they were just too slow to respond, too cumbersome.
Definitely, and I think we saw towards the end of that first, and Hamilton was edging a little bit closer and a little bit closer. And then by the time Sainz came in, he was gaining on Leclerc. There wasn't really much in it. That then meant that by the time that Leclerc came into the pits, the pit window is very, very small, and they were very, very worried about whether Hamilton, when he pitted, would actually come out ahead of them. That was then what prompted the second swap. But even then, again, it seemed a little bit delayed, a bit flat-footed, as you said. They kept saying to Sainz, look, we want you on this lap time. And he said, give me one more lap and everything like that. Do you think they should have been a bit more decisive even then as well and said, look, let Charles pass?
There was just sort of a few lap window where you could see that, Hamilton was setting the purple lap times where he knew he was quicker. At that point, you could potentially argue that they had enough in hand that they could have swapped the cars, realised if it was working, if Leclerc was going to pull away, and swapped them back. It was too slow, and obviously I know we've had a safety car at the end which has bunched things together and perhaps distorted the race, but as we've alluded to earlier, this could have been a race that Ferrari were miles down the road. There shouldn't have been this late pressure.
Yeah, and I think that the fact that Leclerc, after they did the swap, he was pulling away from Sainz about half a second, 7/10 of a lap, so that kind of justified why Ferrari did what they did there. And it looked like Leclerc was going to go on to win that race. I think the debate about whether Hamilton would have caught the Ferraris or not, Toto Wolff, he sort of said, I reckon we could have had them. Hamilton, he thought he'd be close, wasn't entirely sure whether they would have won the race or not, but it would definitely have been a lot closer. But then, of course, we had the safety car, which really did turn things on its head. I think this is the decision that a lot of fans were very confused by, maybe even angered by, if you're a real diehard Charles Leclerc fan, is that they had both Ferraris out in front, 1 and 2. They brought one of them into the pits and kept the other one out. Yet it was Leclerc, the man going for the championship, the man who was leading the race, that they said, no, you stay out, you've got the hard tyres, don't worry, we'll keep you there, Sainz onto the softs. Now that seemed like a bit of an odd decision that many fans didn't really understand. Ferrari explained this by saying that Leclerc had fresher tyres than Sainz, and he also had track position, although both of them had track position over Hamilton, so don't quite fully understand that one. In that situation though, was that a real open goal for Ferrari to miss, with hindsight, not bringing both cars in, but not bringing Leclerc in, the man going for your championship?
Absolutely. Not only have you got the context that it's the lead driver, so the one you want to sort of put the most points behind, but also I think it's almost where the damage comes into play most, because you're leaving a guy out who's, losing downforce, and so that means he's losing pace, but also it can disrupt the airflow and affect how the tyres behave. So you have three options, right? You pick Leclerc, pit Sainz, or you pick both. They've gone for the worst one in this case. I think you try and pit Leclerc, put him on fresh rubber, so any pace he is losing by a broken front wing, he tries and regains that because he's got grippier tyres. And if it is having that effect on tyre life, you sort of swing that balance back, or you bring them both in, and either Hamilton comes in behind you, in which case you still have track position, or he stays out, and the offset we saw with like Leclerc versus Sainz and Hamilton then plays out with the two Ferraris against the Mercedes. And the other thing I'd like to add in is that the last time Ferrari made a pit stop blunder of this scale was at Monaco, which is pretty much follow the leader. Silverstone overtaking is possible. So yes, it's a gamble and you're sort of straying more into unknowns and hypotheticals, but if you're paying your drivers the big bucks to win you the championship, I think you can ask them to overtake late in the race and secure you a victory or 1-2.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was a missed opportunity for Ferrari. Matteo Binotto, he explained after the race, saying that they thought the hard tyre would hold up a bit better. They thought the softs would degrade quite quickly. If Leclerc could just hang on for a couple of laps, and actually he'd be okay against those other cars, but of course wasn't the case. Faded to fourth in the end. Saw he was quite disappointed. Saw that post-race chat between the two of them, but both Binotto and Leclerc could have downplayed that a little bit and said, look, we were obviously very disappointed, but it is what it is. I think it's quite a TV show that is on at the moment. But yeah, it was still a big, I think, opportunity missed for Ferrari today, for Leclerc. How do you think they need to balance, though, keeping Sainz motivated? Obviously, his first win today. Realistically, Leclerc's the man you're going to win the championship. So if they're going to be ruthless, a bit like Red Bull were in Spain when we last spoke, is that what Ferrari needs to do and should have done today?
I think in that context, yes. Sainz has had a slow start to the season. He's put himself in this position where he's tacitly at least the number two driver. And after the blunders, Ferrari have, if they don't like the situation they've in where they've got to pick between the drivers, that's the situation they put in by having unreliable engines and poor pit stops. So they need to back Leclerc, but also there is time for Sainz to get back into that fight and make it more interesting for us all by giving a Ferrari a real headache at the end of the season.
It's been a good weekend here at Silverstone. Obviously a capacity crowd, but of course we do need to talk about the first lap accident that involved Guan Yu Zhou, Alex Albon, and a number of other drivers. Zhou's car obviously was flipped over and then ran on its halo along before going into the gravel. It then flipped in the gravel, went over the tyre barrier and into a fence. Thankfully, Zhou was taken to the medical centre. He was since released and cleared, which I think was wonderful news. Alex Albon, we've received updates very recently that he's been released from Coventry Hospital after being taken there for precautionary checks. So I think a day for F1 to be very thankful for its safety standards. In F2 as well, we saw an accident between Dennis Hauger and Roy Nissany. Matt, I mean, the halo debate, it's been over for many, many years, but I think today has just really proven how far our sport has come.
Absolutely, yeah, like you say, it's not so much a hot topic about that sort of faux argument, what is the DNA of F1? Well, that's rubbish because we've had four-wheel drive cars, we've had closed-wheel cars before, but we're looking over that corner now where Roy Nissany, yes, he instigated the shunt, but the consequences could have been enormous, and thank God nothing came of it. And as soon as the halo exists, as soon as that technology is known about and been tested, if it's not fitted and a driver doesn't have to die but serious head injury and that hasn't been installed and the preventative measure hasn't been taken, the accountability is enormous. So it has to be in place, and we're all hugely grateful it is, because between Zhou's shunt, the F2 shunt, and even the catch fencing having maybe not done its job in an alternate scenario, this could have been a really, really grim day. Zhou's walking around, embracing people, no scratches on him, and just going back to I wasn't in the race sort of mentality.
For all of the motorsport community, obviously, it's lots to be grateful for today, and a great British Grand Prix to look back on for Ferrari, Carlos Sainz getting that win, but of course they do need to look at the championship picture and what they're going to do with Charles Leclerc. Matt, thank you very much for joining me, and we'll be back in 1 week's time for the next edition of Paddock Pack Down after the Austrian Grand Prix.